A few years ago, I watched my friend, a smart, stunning, emotionally intelligent woman, sit across from a guy she really liked and completely vanish. Not physically, but in energy. She dimmed her light, held back her opinions, smiled too politely, and waited for him to lead everything. Why? Because somewhere along the way, she was taught that being wanted meant being quiet, agreeable, and low maintenance. By the end of the date, he said she was nice, not unforgettable, not magnetic, just nice. And I remember thinking, that's what happens when a woman hides her boldness. The truth is, obsession doesn't come from perfection, it comes from presence, from surprise, from bold, rare energy most people are too afraid to offer. And today, I want to show you 5 moves, 5 choices that flip the script. Not to manipulate anyone into liking you, but to awaken the part of you that doesn't wait to be chosen because she's too busy choosing herself. We often confuse confidence with volume, with being the loudest voice in the room, the boldest opinion, the sharpest wit. But the truth is, real confidence isn't noisy. It doesn't need to dominate. It doesn't need applause. It walks into a room already whole, already sure of its value, and simply asks, does this align with me? I remember being at a gathering years ago, watching 2 women in conversation with a group of men. One was expressive, charismatic, clearly trying to hold the spotlight. The other quieter, more still, listened with intention, asked questions that landed deeply, and spoke with clarity when she chose to speak. And when she did, everyone leaned in. Not because she was loud, but because her energy said, I don't need your attention, I know who I am. That's what people remember. That's what moves someone. Most people are performing. They're hoping their charm will buy them love, that their beauty will buy them respect, that their silence will buy them peace. But when you realize your value isn't a currency to spend, it's a state to live in, everything changes. You stop over-explaining, you stop shrinking, you stop auditioning, and you start inviting. Confidence isn't just about how you feel, it's about what you no longer tolerate. When you don't chase, when you're not afraid to walk away, when you can sit in silence without needing to fill it, you become magnetic. Not because you're doing more, but because you're finally doing less from a place of knowing. Because when someone feels that stillness in you, that grounded certainty, they don't see just another option. They see a standard. There's an important distinction that most people never learn, especially in relationships, the difference between giving from strength and giving from lack. You see, giving itself is not the problem. In fact, generosity is one of the most attractive human traits. But when you give to be validated, to be chosen, to prove your worth, you're not giving from power, you're giving from fear. And that kind of giving isn't love. It's a disguised negotiation. I remember speaking to a woman who told me she always gave everything in relationships her time, her energy, her loyalty, and still ended up feeling disposable. But the more we spoke, the clearer it became. She wasn't giving because it felt good. She was giving to buy permanence. She thought if she gave enough, he wouldn't leave. That's not strength. That's survival. Real power is when you give a compliment, not because you want one back, but because you genuinely saw something worthy of admiration. It's when you show interest, not to secure someone's affection, but because you're already secure in your own. And when you do that, something strange happens. People feel safer around you. They let their guard down. And they start seeing you not as someone who needs them, but as someone who chooses them. And that's a radical difference. The person who gives from power doesn't fear being unseen because they already see themselves. They don't attach strings to their kindness because they know their worth isn't up for trade. And ironically, those are the people others become obsessed with, not because they're trying to be liked, but because they've become a source of something rare, value that isn't desperate to be rewarded. You stop trying to prove your value the day you finally realize you already have it. We live in an age where everyone is performing. They're curating, filtering, editing their lives to be more likable, more impressive, more palatable. But the irony is this: while people are shouting louder for attention, the rarest, most powerful energy in the room is the one that's silent but fully present. There's something unmistakably magnetic about a person who is not trying to be anywhere else but here. No agenda, no rush, just presence. I remember being on stage once, mid-sentence, and noticing a woman in the front row. She wasn't the most dressed up. She wasn't even reacting much, but she was locked in. Her eyes weren't darting. Her body wasn't fidgeting. She was just there. And in that moment, I found myself speaking to her. Not because she demanded the attention, but because her stillness made her impossible to ignore. That's presence. Not in volume, but in gravity. Most people aren't really listening in conversations. They're waiting to respond. They're in their head planning their next move. So when someone actually stops, listens, makes eye contact, lets silence breathe it, disarms you, it makes you feel seen. And in a world starving for attention, to feel truly seen is addicting. Presence doesn't mean doing more. It means subtracting what doesn't serve the moment. It means turning your phone off, slowing your breath, being so rooted in yourself that the chaos around you doesn't shake your center. When you can bring that into a room or a relationship, you don't need to try harder. Your energy does the work for you. Because presence doesn't chase attraction, it becomes the reason for it. One of the hardest things for people to grasp, especially when it comes to love, is knowing when to walk away, not in anger, not in manipulation, but in strength. You see, most people stay until the energy dies. They linger, hoping to squeeze just a little more validation out of the moment. But the truth is, timing your exit leaving while the connection is still alive is one of the most powerful statements of self-worth you can make. I remember a dinner I had with someone I was seeing years ago. The conversation was flowing. There was chemistry, momentum, laughter. And then, just as the night was hitting its peak, she stood up and smiled. "I've really enjoyed this," she said, "but I'm going to head out." No explanation, no playing hard to get, just a woman honoring her sense of timing, and I'll be honest, it threw me. In a good way, it made me curious. I kept thinking about her on the drive home. I wanted to see her again. Not just because of how well it went, but because of how it ended. You don't need to overstay to prove interest. In fact, the longer you stay just to be polite, the more you risk dulling the spark that made the moment magical in the first place. The bold woman doesn't chase closure. She doesn't fear a little emotional tension. She leaves a man in a moment of intrigue, of admiration, of what just happened. And that mystery becomes a loop in his mind, a loop he can't close without seeing her again. The most unforgettable people aren't the ones who give everything in one sitting. They're the ones who knew exactly when to stop giving. There's a subtle but powerful energy that comes from the balance between playfulness and poise, and it's often overlooked in conversations about attraction and connection. You see, playfulness alone can feel reckless or immature if not tempered by poise, and poise without playfulness can come across as cold or distant. But when these two qualities combine, they create a form of feminine power that's magnetic and deeply engaging. I remember meeting a woman once at a social event who had this remarkable ability to tease with warmth rather than sarcasm. She would make a playful comment like inviting and slightly challenging, but then follow it with a genuine smile that softened the interaction. The effect was immediate. The people around her leaned in, energized by the dynamic tension she created. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or win approval. She was simply comfortable in her skin, confident enough to invite others into a space of fun without losing her sense of self. This balance sends a clear message. I am confident enough to challenge you, but kind enough to keep the space safe. It's a dance between affection and boundary, between invitation and independence. Menand, really all people respond to this because it stimulates both their desire and respect. It pushes them to rise to the occasion while feeling wanted, not pressured. What many don't realize is that cultivating this balance requires self-awareness and emotional intelligence. It's not about being the loudest or the most provocative, but about holding your power quietly and knowing when to lean into lightness and when to hold your ground. This creates an irresistible rhythm that draws people in naturally. When playfulness and poise merge, they reveal a woman who is fully herself, joyful, grounded, and unapologetically alive. That is the essence of feminine power. There's a profound power in clearly stating what you need, especially in relationships. But many people struggle with this because they confuse asking with demanding or fear being seen as difficult or needy. Yet, the ability to express your needs with grace and without apology is one of the most defining marks of emotional maturity and strength. It's not about being aggressive or overbearing. It's about being honest and clear while holding your own value intact. I recall a time when I was working with a woman who was in a relationship where she felt emotionally disconnected, but she didn't speak up. She hoped her partner would just get it, or that things would improve on their own. Months went by with growing frustration and confusion until she finally found the courage to say, "I really value our time together and I need us to connect more often." She said it softly, without blame or pressure, but with clarity. What happened next was remarkable, no, because he immediately changed overnight, but because she showed him what mattered to her and invited him into her world honestly. He responded with respect, and their relationship deepened because of that openness. When you state your needs calmly and unapologetically, you are not just asking for something, you are setting a standard for how you want to be treated. It communicates that your feelings matter, that your boundaries matter, and that you expect to be honored. This is magnetic because it reveals confidence that you won't settle for less than you deserve. Too often, people stay silent to avoid conflict or rejection, but true connection requires honesty. When you speak your truth clearly, you invite others to meet you with respect, and that is the foundation of any lasting relationship. Clarity is kindness to yourself and to others. Attraction is often misunderstood as a series of move strategies, lines, or tactics that can be executed to guarantee someone's attention or affection. But real attraction doesn't come from the game itself. It emerges in the subtle space between what's said and what's felt, the gap, where mystery lives, where tension builds, and where genuine connection begins. I recall an encounter from years ago. During a casual conversation at a gathering, a woman I was speaking to said something intriguing but left it unfinished. Instead of rushing to fill the silence, she allowed the moment to breathe. That pause, just a few seconds longer than expected, created a kind of magnetic tension. It wasn't manipulation, it was presence. It invited curiosity, made me lean in, wonder what she meant, and feel a deeper connection. That gap between words was more powerful than any scripted compliment or rehearsed line could ever be. The gap is where the magic happens because it triggers our natural desire to seek completion. When you don't give everything away immediately, when you allow room for the other person to fill in the blanks, you engage their imagination and emotion. This space creates anticipation and longing. It's a dance of invitation and restraint, where what's unsaid carries as much weight as what's spoken. This principle applies beyond dating. In life, relationships, and communication, the most compelling moments are often those that are not rushed or forced, but held with patience and confidence. When you trust the process and yourself enough to embrace that space, attraction transforms from a game to a natural unfolding. Because true connection isn't about performing, it's about allowing the space where something real can emerge. One of the most destructive habits people develop, especially in the dating world, is chasing attention. They alter how they speak, dress, even think, just to be seen. But the irony is, the more you chase attention, the more you signal that your value depends on someone else's gaze. And that energy it repels more than it attracts. I've seen this pattern in both men and women, but I recall a conversation I had with a clienta brilliant, accomplished woman who told me how exhausted she felt after every date. She was constantly monitoring his reactions, adjusting herself, trying to be the right kind of woman for whoever was sitting across from her. Her attention was entirely outward. And yet, she always left wondering why none of those connections ever stuck. The answer was simple. She wasn't bringing energy, she was burning it trying to please. When you stop chasing attention and start commanding energy, everything changes. Commanding energy isn't loud, it's not performance, it's embodiment. It's the result of knowing your worth so deeply that you no longer look outward for confirmation. You become the event, not the sideshow. Think about the people who walk into a room and draw everyone's eyes without saying a word. They're not demanding anything. They're not working the crowd. They're just grounded, present, and fully themselves. And that presence creates a gravitational pull. You command energy by living in alignment, by speaking your truth without apology, by letting your standards filter who gets access to you, and by no longer needing to explain why you are the way you are. That's power. The moment you stop asking for permission to be seen and start standing in who you are, you don't just get attention, you attract respect. There's a stark difference between acting bold and being bold. One is armor, the other is essence. And the line between them comes down to this: are you moving from your wounds or from your wholeness? Because when boldness is driven by pain, it's brittle, it's reactive, it masks itself as strength, but it's often just a loud declaration of past hurt. I remember coaching someone who had been deeply betrayed in a relationship. She came to our session full of fire. "I'm done with men," she said. "Next time, I call the shots. I don't care anymore." On the surface, it sounded like empowerment, but underneath it was fear. Fear of being vulnerable again, fear of being seen, fear of being hurt. And when fear runs the show, it doesn't produce confidence, it produces control. Wholeness, on the other hand, is a quiet, steady thing. When your boldness comes from wholeness, you're not trying to prove a point. You're not trying to punish anyone. You're simply rooted. You know who you are. You know what you offer. You know what you won't tolerate. And because of that, you can speak with clarity, not defensiveness. You can walk away without theatrics. You can choose love again, not because you need it, but because you're full enough to give and receive it without losing yourself. True boldness says, "I'm not afraid of being seen, because I've already accepted myself." It's not spiteful. It's not loud. It's grounded. And that kind of energy, one that rises from healing rather than Heidingus magnetic. When your actions stop being a reaction to your past and start being a reflection of your truth, that's when everything shifts. One of the most costly mistakes people make, especially women who deeply careers bending themselves to fit into someone else's world, hoping that if they're easy enough, chill enough, low maintenance enough, they'll be chosen. But here's the problem with that. When you contort yourself to be more palatable, more convenient, you're not being loved, you're being tolerated. And over time, that tolerance turns into quiet resentment, not just toward them, but toward yourself. I worked with someone who was dating a man with a busy, demanding lifestyle. She adjusted everything around his schedule-canceled plans, stayed up late to talk, kept her weekends open, always ready for him. She believed she was being supportive, but she wasn't building a partnership. She was orbiting around someone else's life and losing hers in the process. The more she tried to blend into his world, the more invisible she became. And still, he didn't commit. What she hadn't realized was this: the right person doesn't want you to shrink to fit their reality. They want to step into yours. They want to be challenged, inspired, pulled into something meaningful. And when you are living a life, your proud offer life with direction, passion, rhythm, purpose, you become magnetic. You become the experience. A man who's truly ready for something real doesn't want a woman who waits around to be chosen. He wants someone who's already chosen herself. Someone whose life is rich with her own values, her own priorities, and her own standards. And if he wants to be part of that, he'll have to earn his seat at that tableau by taking up space, but by bringing value of his own. Stop auditioning for someone else's story. Write your own and let him decide if he's capable of stepping into it. So here's what I want you to remember. You were never meant to chase love. You were meant to become the kind of woman who draws it in effortlessly. These bold moves aren't tricks or tactics. They're reflections of a deeper truth that you are already enough. When you lead with presence, with playful strength, with clear boundaries and unwavering self-worth, you don't just attract attention, you invite devotion. Let others rise to meet you. Let them feel the weight of your authenticity. Because the right man won't just notice you, he'll recognize you. And he'll never want to let you go